next presenter is not directly related to precision agriculture. Yes, she touches everyone in this room. I'm pleased to announce Megz Reynolds with the Do More Agriculture Foundation. The Do More Agriculture Foundation is a national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture and is changing the culture of agriculture to where we're all encouraged, supported, empowered to take care of each one of us mental health. Producers are among the most vulnerable when it comes to mental health issues. By collaborating with the entire industry, those working to address the state of mental health in agriculture, we can make a substantial impact together. Please welcome Megz.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'd like to echo thank you to all the sponsors and thank you to Farms.com for having me here today on behalf of the Do More Agriculture Foundation. So my name is Megz Reynolds. Now I'm an executive director for the Do More Agriculture Foundation, but I was a grain farmer in southwest Saskatchewan. I have lived experience on farm. I didn't grow up farming. I grew up in Calgary, Alberta, and then I moved to a grain farm. Really the only thing I knew at that point was that at some point everything's going to break down. That never failed me. But I wasn't, and I'm not sure if anything really could have prepared me for what life was going to be like on farm. Having all of those factors out of my control, some of the isolation that obviously was different moving to a farm from a bigger urban setting. And I got into talking about mental health, sharing about mental health. So in 2018, I testified to the Agri-Food Standing Committee about mental health and agriculture, and at that time I told them it felt like I was digging my own grave trying to follow my dreams. We'd had a couple bad years, really hard, challenging years with drought and weather, and then commodity prices being lower. And while I wasn't having suicidal thoughts, I felt like my only worth to my family was in my life insurance policy. I felt that I'd failed as a farmer, as a spouse, and as a parent. And even though I didn't grow up on farm, I'd already attached my self-identity to my ability to farm, even though there were all of those things out of my control. Do More Ag was founded 4 years ago now, and we basically came out of a tweet. So somebody direct messaged one of our founders and said, we just lost another farmer, community member, to death by suicide. What resources exist? No one's talking about this. Nobody's doing anything about this. What can we do? And so Do More was founded to do more, and we operate on 3 pillars. So awareness, that's really about what I'm doing here today, speaking with all of you. Thank you for being here. Working to break that stigma. Community, and of course that community is not just in real life. We can have that in other ways as well, especially as we've seen after the pandemic. And then resources. We really work to bring all of the resources to one page. Our website has a really great resource list that breaks everything out from province and then also territory. It'll use your location to bring up what is more specific to your area. It can be really challenging to find what's out there. Every province is different, so we really try to bring it all into one place. So this is something I say at the beginning of every conversation, and I would like this to be a conversation. So if there is at any time a question that you have or a point you want to make or you want to share something, feel free to do so. This is a safe place, but still we're in a public setting, so just be aware that anything you do share, obviously anyone here is open to, and if someone is sharing in a way that makes me worried for their safety or someone in their life, then I have a responsibility to follow up on that. Okay, you've just eaten lunch, so now I'm going to get you guys moving a little bit. Stand up if you've ever been scared to reach out to somebody about mental health, either about something you've noticed in somebody else or something that's going on with you. Nobody? Number 2, stand up if you've ever wanted to check in with someone. Nope, keep standing, but you aren't sure how to. Number 3, stand up if you don't feel equipped to handle a mental health conversation. And number 4, stand up if you know someone who has been affected by a mental illness. And now I want you guys to look around the room. The point of this exercise, outside of getting you all up after eating lunch, is to know that you are not alone in those feelings or those thoughts. We're all in the same spot. We're all maybe feeling uncomfortable about how to have that conversation, should we have that conversation, and hopefully what we're going to do here today is going to help with that. This is a great thing to do at any time during the day. So this is something to take away from here. You can practice this in your day-to-day. This can be done in the cab of an equipment. This could be done before you call your banker, anytime that you're stressed. Maybe you're about to have a conversation on farm that has something to do with succession planning. But the box breathing, where you're breathing in for 4 seconds, holding it for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, and then holding that, is a really great tool for regulating your nervous system. Right now, this is where we are in Canadian agriculture, and we're very lucky for the research that Guelph University has done, Farm Management Canada has done. Otherwise, we wouldn't have any of these statistics. So in 2018, when the first study came out from the University of Guelph, 35% of Canadian producers met the classification for depression. 58% met the classification for anxiety. 45% reported high stress. 68% more susceptible to chronic stress than the general population, 20 to 30% higher rates of suicide than any other occupation in Canada, and 4 times more likely to use a firearm to die by suicide than the general public. Now, the University of Guelph redid this study in 2021, and of course the pandemic influenced how we were all doing, but what they found was that in 2021, 1 in 4 Canadian producers felt like their life was not worth living, wished that they were dead, or had thought about taking their own life in the past 12 months. This is where we're at as an industry, and this is why we're here having that conversation. One of the biggest challenges we have when it comes to mental health in Canadian agriculture is the stigma surrounding mental health in Canadian agriculture. And we have moved the needle. I wouldn't be up here, we wouldn't be having this conversation 7, 8, 9 years ago. For me, stigma has 2 parts. So you have external stigma, and that is what might keep me from making an appointment at a local counselor's office, because I'm worried that someone's going to see my truck parked out there and I don't want them to know that something is going on. I'm worried about them thinking something's going on with my mental health. That's that external stigma piece. The internal stigma piece is what keeps me from being able to acknowledge and then accept that something is going on with my mental health. And that could just be challenges that are in my life affecting my mental health. That doesn't need to be full-blown mental illness, but that internal stigma is often the hardest piece. And what I found, now that we're back doing in-person shows, this summer, when I got to the first farm show, I've been with Do More since February, one of the main points that was brought up to me multiple times was, I am so glad that we're having this conversation. I support mental health in agriculture. I support someone else having a conversation with a mental health professional, but I would never need to have a conversation with a mental health professional. And to me, that really speaks to that internal stigma piece. So we've moved the needle externally. We're more comfortable acknowledging mental health in agriculture, talking about mental health in Canadian agriculture, but we're still struggling with that internal piece. Especially after the pandemic, we've heard a lot of words. There's mental illness, there's mental wellness, there's mental health. What does that mean? What's the difference between them all? We don't have health without mental health. Our mental health can influence our physical health, how our body is actually doing, whether we have pain, whether we have issues with digestion, other things going on. Mental health is a day-to-day. There could be factors going on in your life. So at a period of my life when I was farming, I had 2 young children under 2, and I was full-time farming. Half the time they were in the combine cab or the cedar cab with me. I was also not sleeping great at night because one of them liked to wake up every 2 hours. During those really busy seasons on the farm, my mental health took a beating because of those external factors. So because of me not being able to sleep properly, because of the stress of that time of year with farming, and then of course keeping tiny humans alive. Over your lifetime, not everyone is going to experience a mental illness, but everyone is going to have somebody within their sphere, their network, that has or is experiencing a mental illness. Who here thinks that stress can be a good thing? Awesome. I think that we have villainized stress a lot when we talk about mental health, and it's important to remember that stress is healthy, but having the right amount of stress is what makes it healthy. So if we don't have enough stress, if we have too little stress, that's where we can have low motivation, we can have poor performance in our day-to-day or in our business operations. When we have that healthy level, that moderate level of stress, that's when we're engaged, we're alert, we're challenged, we're really kind of peak performance mode. If we have too much stress, that can be where we're starting to trigger kind of that fight or flight response. We might be freezing. You can shut down, you can have anxiety, and you can actually have then poor performance because of the amount of stress that you're carrying. This is the most important slide I'm going to have up here today, and I encourage you to take a photo of it. This is the mental health continuum. You can see that there's 4 different colors. So we have healthy being green, they're stoplight colors. That is where we want to try to be, or where we want to try to get back to when something's going on. So here you're going to have normal fluctuations in mood. This is where you can take something in stride, those unknowns happening, coming at you. You've got a good sense of humor. You are, when it comes to gambling or alcohol consumption, it's at a healthy rate if you're choosing to engage. You have self-confidence. You are able to focus on the task at hand. You are able to check in on yourself and do what needs to be done to take care of your mental wellness. When you move into the yellow, that's where you start to be in that reactionary phase. So maybe you start having trouble sleeping at this phase. Maybe you are having trouble focusing. Maybe you're quicker to react when someone asks you a question or brings something to your attention. You might be low energy. You might be having more headaches, carrying that body stress that's affecting headaches and other body pains. You could have nightmares. You might at this point start pulling back socially, starting to move into that isolation piece. If you are someone that has been drinking, this is often where you're going to see alcohol consumption increase or risk behavior increase, which could include gambling. This is a really important place to recognize that some of these things are going on and that there are signs telling you you need to check in on your mental health. And that could be getting you back to the green, could be as simple as having a conversation with a family member or having a conversation with a friend. It could be going out and tinkering in your shop for a couple hours and just having some time for you. It could be sitting down with your financial planner to work through the what ifs of the coming year. I mean, we saw the spring was crazy. It was like we're coming out of the pandemic. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Ukraine is invaded and suddenly fuel prices spike, fertilizer prices spike right at seeding. So trying to take some of those unknowns away, meeting with your planner, figuring out those numbers, but trying to get back to that green. When you're not trying to get back to that green, you're not recognizing those signs that are going on. That's when left unattended, you're going to move into that orange, into that injured phase. This is when your anxiety is going to increase. You could have pervasive sadness, your negative attitude, negative self-talk, difficulty concentrating, nightmares, more sleep disturbances, more increased alcohol consumption. This is when you really need to reach out, and this could be a time for professional help. It's always better to talk to someone sooner than later, but if we're not dealing with where we're at there, that's when we could be moving into full-blown mental illness. And what I have seen with my experience in agriculture is I truly believe that we have normalized the yellow and the orange. And so we see what should be signs of something going on with our mental health or someone's mental health around us as character traits. We're like, oh, that's just Megz. She's always had trouble concentrating. She's always really quick to react. You don't want to ask her questions or if anything happens, you don't want to bring that to her because she's going to bite your head off. Those are signs that something's going on and that it's important to then reach out to that person and say, hey, I've seen these things, or if it's yourself, be able to say, something's going on. How do I get myself back to that healthy place? I like to point this one out. Obviously, with farming, there are times when we don't have a choice how much sleep we get. We have to prioritize what is going on farm and what season it is. But it's really good to be aware of how not having the sleep that our body needs can affect our mental health and just our cognitive ability to process what's going on and be safe. There's fields that I seeded in the middle of the night that the next day I go out there and I don't remember seeding them. because I was running on so little sleep, and that's not safe. And we don't always think about how our sleep hygiene or our mental health influences how we're able to be safe on farm, but it's a very important piece. Signs to look for: withdraw from activities that people used to enjoy or you used to enjoy. This could be coffee row, this could be church. Changes in sleep patterns, obviously that's more in a family dynamic setting. Changes in appetite, changes in socialization. So again, that could be someone pulling back from coffee row. You can also see this on social media. Is this someone that's traditionally been sharing a lot, commenting, interacting a lot with people? Suddenly they're not there anymore. I moved off farm in 2019, and I had been doing a lot online to try to talk to the person I used to be when I was in the city and share what we were doing on farm, why we were doing it. I made videos about equipment, how it worked, what they were all for. When I moved off farm, I had a hard time transitioning from kind of putting a lot out about the farm to not farming anymore. And so I completely pulled offline because I was challenged with what just was going on in my personal life. So look for that online if that has been someone who's been there a lot in the past. Of course, evidence of self-harm, and then other changes. So this could be someone who's always taken pride in their appearance. Maybe they always have pressed shirts or their hair's done. Maybe at their farmyard they've rototilled always around the trees so there aren't weeds on the tree row, and suddenly things are kind of falling apart. That can be a sign that something's going on. This is just a check-in we throw in here, but again, this is another thing to take away from today's conversation. This is something I have to do all the time. I hold my stress between my shoulder blades, so if I'm not checking in on myself to see how I'm doing with tension, my shoulders are up by my ears, and by the end of the day, I have a lot of pain in my muscles because I've just been so clenched up because of stress. So this is a really great check-in throughout the day, just on how you're doing and just making that conscious effort to release that stress and not hold it. So what does support look like? We've talked about signs to look for. Number one, active listening. So you want to ask open-ended questions. Tell me about, help me understand, what do you think? And you can use, if you have noticed those symptoms, you can say, hey, I've noticed that you haven't been to coffee row the last 3 weeks. Is there something, are you okay? Or is there something going on you want to talk about? And then you want to validate. So we could all go through a similar experience, but that doesn't mean how we are affected by that experience is going to be the same as everybody else. But all of our feelings and our challenges that is true to us. That is our truth. And so we need to be really cautious that we're validating. We like to solve problems and we like to fix things, but we really want to validate what someone is saying when they're sharing with us. So in here, I can pretend to be John and say, I just can't take it anymore. The to-do list is only ever getting longer, and farming just feels like it's getting harder and harder. Those hits just keep coming more frequently. I feel like I can't catch a break, and I don't know how much longer I can continue like this. So an example of validating and being open for that person, creating that safe place for them to talk is, you're right, farming is tough. And even though we work hard, there's always something around the corner that needs us to attend to. You're just letting them know that what they're feeling is okay. You don't have to solve it for them, that's not your role. But just letting them know that what they're feeling is okay. Early in my farming career, we lost 90% of our crop in 10 minutes in a hailstorm at harvest. And nothing, again, in the city prepared me for what that was gonna be like. And I felt like I couldn't talk about it because we weren't the only farm that had crop damage, but everyone else seemed fine. Everyone else, had grown up with this. This is farming, this is what happens, and everyone else was okay. So I couldn't have that conversation or I didn't feel like I could have that conversation. I guarantee you other people were struggling, even if, that was the 20th hailstorm that they've experienced in their life. But because we don't always share stuff, it's easy to feel like we're isolated in our feelings and in our experiences. Oh, it's gonna work.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I can't say it better than Brene Brown, but one of the things that we do all the time in agriculture, is something happens and it might throw us off for the year or set us back, and what do we say? What is our first response? There's always next year, right? And to me, I think we have to be eternal optimists to exist in agriculture, but we also need to give ourselves space to experience what has happened. Yesterday I was on a panel talking about the BC floods, and they're still struggling with just the trauma that so many of those producers went through. And to say, we're so quick, there's always next year, but I think sometimes what we can do in that moment, whether that's to someone else or whether that's to ourselves, and it's not intentionally, but we shut down that door, we close that door on having that conversation, or supporting that person, or allowing that person or ourselves to kind of work through, feel, grieve, whatever it is, what has just gone on that's been a challenge. Supporting within our means is really important. There's a picture of milk, and what it is to highlight is basically, if you keep pouring from a jug, you can't pour from an empty jug. So you have to keep taking care of yourself, and that can be really hard when you're in that support role. But you do need to be able to prioritize yourself and your mental health to be able to continue to support those around you, especially someone that is dealing with a mental health challenge or illness. So again, how to have a conversation. I don't know how to go back, so we're going to see here. How to have a conversation. You want to see those signs and use them to start that conversation. So I've noticed this. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Maybe it's easier to share with them first. So I'm really stressed out about this year because of X, Y, and Z. How are you feeling? How are you doing with everything? There was an incredible thread that was shared on Twitter this year, and it was, I believe, an agronomist that went out to a farm, and she could tell that there was something going on with the farmer. They weren't just the way that they normally would be. And she came out and asked and said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "No, I'm not." And so she said, "Can we call a crisis line together?" She didn't know, she wasn't a mental health professional, she didn't know how to solve that problem or feel equipped to take on that conversation. And so together they called the crisis line. And she helped him get that conversation started, and then she removed herself so that he could have that conversation in private. And there's a very good chance that she might have saved his life. But it can be hard in that moment, but also at the same time that easy. Can we call a crisis line? Can I help you call a crisis line? Resiliency. This is one thing we like to think we have a lot of in agriculture, again, to keep bouncing back from all of those things out of our control. But the 2021 research from the University of Guelph found that we have about 80% less resiliency, or farmers are scoring lower than 80% of the US general population when it comes to resiliency. And a huge part of that has to do with mental health and just not having that awareness, or because of the stigma, not prioritizing being able to take care of ourselves and possibly support those around us. So strategies to grow resilience, this can be recognizing that everybody suffers. So again, if you're going through something, it's really easy to feel isolated, but you're not alone. Someone else has gone through that, someone else is going through that. If you're talking to yourself about your experience, you know, my story of the hail, I can't talk to anyone about this, no one else is struggling. I had negative self-talk. I wouldn't talk to someone else that way, I wouldn't talk to a friend or a family member that way, so why am I talking to myself? So try to change how you're talking to yourself. Daily coping skills, that could be deep breathing, again, thought-changing activities, so trying to change how you're negatively talking to yourself and making it positive. Prayer, meditation are helpful for some people, and practicing forgiveness, and that can be for yourself, for how you went through an experience or how you went through something. It could also be forgiving someone else, and that doesn't need to mean letting them off the hook. That can just simply mean allowing yourself to move forward. Boundaries are really, really important, especially with mental health, but they're also really important for healthy relationships. And a boundary isn't about building a wall, it's about showing someone where the door is. And so boundaries are really important in our personal life, in our family life, on our farms, in our businesses. And when you set healthy boundaries and you can communicate those boundaries, you give permission for the people around you to also set their own boundaries and communicate them. And what is a boundary one week may change another week, and that could depend on what's going on externally that influences you, or what's going on within maybe your family dynamic or just within yourself. This is one of my favorite things, but I'm also a list person. But especially in agriculture, where there is so much out of our control, a way to try to mitigate that or manage how you're feeling and responding to all of those things that are out of your control, write down everything that is worrying you, everything that is stressing you, everything that is keeping you up at night. And then go through that list one by one, and cross off what is out of your control. Once you've crossed it off, your list is gonna look a lot smaller, and then focus on those things that are within your control. Balance, I don't really love this term, especially in farming. So I think it's about choosing what is the most important, what balls you're gonna keep in the air, working within your business or your family to help keep those balls in the air, and then changing when priorities change, but not putting pressure on yourself to be able to do everything or to be able to balance everything at the same time. Self-compassion, again, this relates back to that resiliency piece. So talking to yourself the way you would somebody else, acknowledging that you're not alone, and it's okay that we're still learning. Right? We're all at different paths on this journey, especially when it comes to mental health. I didn't grow up on farm, but I didn't grow up learning about mental health. No one taught me about mental health in the city either, right? So having grace with yourself and being patient with yourself. When to ask for help, earlier is always better. A certified professional is always best. But of course, talking to somebody is better than talking to nobody or keeping everything in. When to call 911, are you at immediate danger to yourself, or is someone around you at immediate danger to themselves or to somebody else? Has someone communicated to you that they are intending to commit suicide? And then wellness check, 911 can be a great source, and I know with some of the challenges we've had over the past year, I was in Atlantic, Canada this spring, and I know that there were some of the chicken co-ops or organizations that had used wellness checks to check in on producers with avian influenza going on. And the producer was fine, but it was a way for them, you know, they'd seen some of those flags and they just wanted to make sure. It's always better to make sure. This is just a quick list of resources. Like I said, our website has brought everything to one place. So definitely the easiest place to find anything. And then right now, we also have our community fund going on with FCC. So through our website, you can email or you can apply to the community fund and for your community to bring mental health, either first aid or our Talk, Ask, Listen course or University of Guelph's In the Know or some other programming into your community. We pay for that, whether that's the hall rental and food and the mental health facilitator, what have you. But that's open till December 10th for applications, so a great way to bring this conversation into your community. I want to thank you all for sticking around. I know not everybody wants to listen about mental health or talk about mental health, but it is important, and the only way we change this culture is by having these conversations and learning more and growing more a little bit together. So thank you all very much. If you've got questions, feel free to shout them out. I'm also going to stick around for a little while, so if you do have a question or you want to have a conversation and you don't want to do it in the setting, come find me after.